My name is Willie. I'm a nutritionist across the street at the health department. I've been doing working as a nutritionist for the last 7 years, and before that I was a chef for 15. So I'm not one of the people that come in and want to change everything to the point to where food no longer is a fun thing. I'm going to be mostly starting through talking about different food groups and practical applications, going through them, and then some ideas on how to go about doing it while on y'all's job. And that'll be peppered through a little bit, and then I'll have any Q&A if anybody's got any questions at the end. The first one I'm going to start off with is with hydration, because that's the number one thing that actually affects us on a minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis. And most of us never think of ourselves as dehydrated unless maybe you're out on it's been one of those crazy days, you've been just out in the heat all day long and you're going from one call to the next, and once you haven't had time to stop at a convenience store, get anything to drink, and you're parched. That's not the kind of dehydration I'm speaking of. I'm talking about the mild dehydration that most of us experience on a day-to-day basis. Because the vast majority of us are at any point in time mildly dehydrated. And it's not always because we're not drinking enough fluids. That is part of it, depending on the person. It also has to do with what kinds of fluids are we drinking. And a lot of times we're just not water fans. And luckily, there's all kinds of things we can do if you're not a water fan. Mio has the little squirts that you can put in, the Crystal Light drinks. Any of these things, honestly, will be just fine. There's limited amount of caffeine. The Mios do have the energy ones, so be careful, especially if you've got a younger child that you're trying to get more water in and you like the little squirts. Some of them have just an E on them. And that's the only thing that's on the cover that'll actually say energy. Luckily, most of them say energy across it. So if you actually trying to get your child to drink a little bit more water, you squirt that in, you're going to have the Tasmanian devil on your hands for the next 3.5 hours as all that warring and different chemicals work their way out of the system. But the rest of the time, those are great things to do just because, one, you don't feel like you're just drinking plain water. It's easier to drink more water in when you flavor them like that, considering we're supposed to have about 8 of these a day for optimum hydration. We usually go quite a bit under this, and that's okay to be under that. If you were able to do 5 of those a day, that would be great. Usually we start off with our hydration differently, starting with like coffee in the morning or a caffeinated beverage. I'm not one to take the caffeinated beverage away to start the morning. However, when we start off with 4 of them, our body's gotten so used to being amped up that we start to run into crashes throughout the day because of that. And we start to reach out to other things throughout the day to try to compensate for either being more caffeine or sugar, which also helps us kind of satisfy that part of when a crash is starting to take place. We also look for carbohydrate type stuff. All of these things, when you start taking in too much caffeine, taking in too much sugar, all of a sudden, all of the liquid that we've drank at that point in time start to have different effects. If we're drinking, say, a Mountain Dew, which is very popular in the South, which has higher caffeine than most of the other regular colas that don't advertise themselves as hypercaffeinated. Because there's so much caffeine in it, they have to add extra sugar. So they have more sugar than a Coca-Cola, though a Coca-Cola tastes more sweet. And it's because of the increased amount of caffeine, which has a natural bitter flavor. So you've got a bittering agent, and you've got the sugar in there together. Both of those cause liquid to actually leave your body faster, not hold on to it for the hydration needs. When we go to things that have a whole lot of lemon lime type flavors in them, those are diuretics. So here once again, we're taking in too much of that, and then the liquid's going out instead of staying in to make sure all of our cells are hydrated where we actually work on peak performance. In y'all's field where that matters is because studies through with the CDC and multiple universities across the country, there was a study between 2001 and 2009 that actually studied decision-making and hydration. And when someone is very stressed, you lose water. Overworked, you're usually taking something, with a little caffeine, sugar, doing something kind of give you that energy pep. Once again, you're losing liquid. If we're doing it with a soda with the phosphoric acids, it's got the extra flavorings in it, with the syrups, other things that cause our body to try to flush out. We're losing hydration, and mild lapses in judgment have taken place. And we're not talking about things that are on the major scale. Something minor of a slight detail that goes from point A that never quite made it to point B. And where that kind of detail can happen, 400 or 500 times and it doesn't matter. That 501st time, it was that one detail that from not enough rest, and y'all have stressful jobs, far more stressful than my job is. The worst thing happens with my job is I can accidentally make someone fat. Your jobs are far more stressful. So when you've got that, lack of sleep kicks in, mildly dehydrated, you could be coming down from the caffeine buzz and the sugar breakfast of Krispy Kreme donuts that morning, and all of a sudden you're just not at that peak as you were. Luckily, when it comes to hydration, that's the easiest thing to fix for y'all. Whether you're on the go or not, there's the little powders you can pour in, the droplets. None of those need to be refrigerated. You can actually have big old things with water that you fill 90% up with ice. Just enough water to hold it together, and those things will stay cool throughout the morning, even on a hot day if you've got one of the really good thermal units. And you can actually flavor that throughout the morning to where you actually feel like you're drinking something you want to drink. So that's the easiest one to fix. When it comes to fruit, once again, this is an easy one to fix, given y'all's working lifestyle. One, you don't need to do anything to prepare fruit for the most part. Certain fruit travel better than others. Like if it's a hot day and it's going to be, in a windowsill or something without the AC unit, I would not pick a banana or strawberries because those will turn to mush. But like an apple, a pear, oranges, something like that is something you can actually take with you and have a very limited amount of anything to eat on. You kind of peel and go. And when it comes to an apple or a pear or a more hardy fruited that's really solid, you don't have to worry so much even about peeling them. You can eat the peels. And actually, a good chunk of the nutrition in something like an apple or a pear actually is in the skins. But that allows you to have something added to the diet that will help you get from breakfast to lunch, lunch to snack, and then snack to dinner if you needed to, anywhere in between, and that's the fiber. Because when that gets into our stomach, it takes our stomach a while to work that down. Once you work down the fiber, it empties into the intestines. You're now talking 3.5 hours after you ate, that all of that empties. If it's a very high fiber food. Now if it's something that's not a high fiber food, it's going to empty less quickly, but it keeps you from being hungry quite so quickly. When we go to a snack that's not quite so user-friendly, like say a Snickers. A Snickers takes very little time to get through our system because carbohydrates are the fuel that takes the least amount of time to actually break down. And sugar is the most simple form of carbohydrates. So yeah, the peanut that's in there, the 7 or 8 peanuts that make up throughout the entire bar might take longer to actually digest. Or it could just go all the way through and digest very little at all. We've all seen our own poop. We know it happens. So, really. Plus, if you're someone who's actually in the process of trying to make a diet change and get healthier, and you're going to the gym and you're working out, and you finally got some momentum and you're done and you're like, I've done an hour and a half at the treadmill, I'm gonna have me a little energy bar that's healthy, and then we'll go home and get stuff going for dinner and get that, trying to get a good night's sleep. When you eat that energy bar, you have eaten 2.5 times the calories that you burned in that 1 hour of working out. You're tearing it up on a treadmill, you're burning about 1,000 to 100 to 120 calories in that period of time. The average energy bar has about 300. Even if you get the ones that are energy bar lights or diet bar lights, you're talking 180 calories. Now, if you've gotten and just killed it on a workout, you've been on one of the machines that really burns some calories, and you're hungry because it's time to eat, and you get one of those, at best, you flatline. So that kind of explains, when it comes to these healthy bars, they're not always the best snack either. Because if you look on the back of them, they're not, what they're going to have is sugar grams. And it might say 15. Then it's going to say carbohydrate grams, and they'll say 80. And that's enough to let you know that, yeah, it may not be table sugar, but just a few, minutes after you start eating it, your body starts breaking them down from the big sugars to smaller and smaller sugars, to where 20 minutes after you eat that energy bar, it is now a simple sugar in the body to be used. So those are used a lot right now when it comes to when we're on the go, when we're hungry, we're running around and we don't have time to eat. If y'all ever one of those days out on the road, just getting to a convenience store to pick something up can be very problematic. So I say to keep a little something like that from time to time, but use those for your emergency days when you don't have any opportunity to do anything. Because I've just been in a grocery store before and seen paramedics. They're going through, they're buying stuff, and then all of a sudden their walkie-talkie says something, and they just leave their everything where they're at and they take off running. Well, I mean, how many times can that possibly happen in a day? I'm sure that you could just be like, my God, I'm in the grocery store for the 3rd time and I'm having to leave. And if that's the case, that's when those bars are great to use. The rest of the time, eat something that's healthier for the body and more natural for the body to do. Now, vegetables. In the South, we do veggies very differently than the rest of the world does. We take a vegetable and we will cook that vegetable until teeth are absolutely optional when it comes to eating them. If you go to a Chinese buffet, Asian buffet, and see how crunchy their green beans are. In the South, we don't eat green beans nearly that crunchy. We consider some green beans that crunchy, we consider that raw. So, when you do cook a vegetable down that far in a pot, please don't throw away the liquid. Because that pot liquor that's in it is almost all of the vitamins and nutrients that vegetable had to start with. I would even take out the green beans or whatever is in there and cook that liquid down till it's almost nothing and add it back. And it's going to kind of add like a sauce type thing to it. And basically, the nutrients are going to be there and mixed over it, but it's going to be thicker and coating the food instead of pulling out on the plate and not being eaten. Vegetables are not the easiest to do on the road type thing. What I would say when it comes to vegetables is make it as easy as y'all can do, for one. And eat something you want to eat. So if you're just all of a sudden saying, I'm going to get healthier, I'm going to tear down some Brussels sprouts, and you just, the last time you ate a Brussels sprout, you were 7 and hated it, and you just bought 4 bags of the Brussels sprouts thinking that, well, as I've gotten older, I eat other things like greens I didn't used to eat. Test something, see if you like it, and then get a lot of those things. And try to buy them for work in the cook bags, freezer bags, where all you have to do is grab out of the freezer, take the bag, put it in the microwave for 4.5 minutes, and it's done. Pick the ones that are just the vegetable and say, here's a example. Broccoli and not broccoli and cheese sauce. One, that broccoli and cheese sauce, that cheese sauce is hideous. Hideous. Buy cheese and the broccoli and cheese sauce, put it in for 4 minutes, open that bag out, and throw about 6 slices of the cheese on there if you want it. Put it back in for another 45 seconds. It's going to melt all over that. You're going to have actual cheddar cheese on it instead of a cheese food, which has a little bit of cheese to where they can call it cheese food. A whole lot of vegetable oil and tons of sodium. So, and the sodium's in there just to hide the fact that they added so much oil to the dairy that it doesn't taste good anymore. Plus, it's not that much harder to make. You just throw it in, you open the bag, throw on the slices, put it back in for 45 seconds, pull it out, and it's ready to eat. If you get the call at that point in time that you've got to leave, just put it in the refrigerator, and then a few hours later when you get back, you can just pull it out, put it in for 1.5 minutes, and it's still ready to go. But pick veggies you think you will like to eat. And if you're someone who's only going to eat it in a salad with a bunch of ranch dressing, eat it with the ranch dressing in the salad. Just remember how many calories you can be adding in with some of the dressings. Because the dressings can have a lot of calories in them, where you're eating salads and you just gained weight. And you're like, how in God's name did I just gain 2 pounds when I'm eating 2 salads a day every single day for 1.5 weeks? If you go to McDonald's and get that shaker salad has more calories than a Big Mac. Because of the fat and the sugar that they add into the salad dressing to put it in there, and you do the shaking. The fat-free dressings do not have fewer calories most of the time. A lot of times they have more calories. I always say go with the ones that are the normal and start weaning yourself back on the amount that you have. Now, if it's an oil and vinegar dressing, you can kind of go nuts with it. Because oil and vinegar dressings have some oil in it, but not that much. Tons of vinegar, which has no calories. Herbs, no calories. Salt and pepper, no calories. And at that point in time, the only thing you're getting is you might pee a little more often because of the diuretic of the vinegar. But when you start getting to the ones that are like the honey mustard, blue cheese, the ranch, use it and then try to dial back a little bit. But a salad is a wonderful way to go about getting veggies in quickly. Because you can make those at home, bring them, put them in a refrigerator, and on the quick, open the top, pour the stuff on it, fork, eat it, and done. So I'm a big fan of being able to do those. And in the beginning, if you're not a salad eater, lean on the salad dressings until you get used to it. Now, if you have gotten to the point of, I'm changing some things up, and I've got some fruit in me every day, I've got some veggies in me every day, and I'm spending 45 minutes on the jog. That means you went a little aggressive in the beginning too quick. So if you're not eating any veggies or any fruit right now, go slow for about a week. It'll make things a whole lot easier for you in the long run. It only takes about a week of eating just a little bit more each day to get the digestive tract used to the changes that are coming its way. Some people it doesn't bother at all. Some people it's a big change. A lot of times when you're changing with the adding the fiber and the new foods into your diet, you can become gassy. Get a gas X. In a week and a half, those will go away. It's just the acidity level is changing in your intestines, and as that changes, different bacteria are now populating. The bacteria that help keep us healthy are growing. The ones that keep us unhealthier are reducing because the environment of the intestines where all of our immunity comes from has now been changed. Well, anytime there's a change like that, and there's some bacteria that are dying and some that are proliferating, you're going to have release of gas. So when that happens, just expect it. It's usually a little bit more of a problem for the women because men tend to not really care about that kind of thing, especially if they're around other guys. But just expect it, get the gas X, you'll be all right. Now the meats. And I'm going to go, just take a minute with the meats, because that's one of our biggest areas where we start getting into the danger stuff with our diet. And I am not a proponent of vegetarianism. It's fun if you want to do it, it's healthy. You might live to be 104 doing it. I wouldn't do it because there's just too many delicious things out there to eat that are healthy, and you can be just as healthy without being a vegetarian. So, if you're a vegetarian, most of what I've already talked about so far doesn't matter anyway, because you're already having to do it. It's what you buy at the store and what you buy when you are at a restaurant. If you're ordering filet mignon from time to time, you don't need to worry so much about the cardiovascular risks. Because if you actually see what this steak looks like before you cook it, it's got very little marbling, and even on the outside of it, all that fat's been removed. So it's a very lean cut of meat. I mean, it's on par to being every bit as lean as a pork loin that's had its fat removed, or dark meat chicken. But when we have a ribeye that's just loaded and marbled with it, that's more of the meat where you can start getting some trouble if you've already got a heart condition, cholesterol problems, or you've got a strong family history of it. If it's ground up and you're buying it somewhere else and they're preparing it, it's going to have about 75% meat, and the rest of it's going to be fat. You can buy at the store all the way up to 92, and I think even 96% lean now. And if you're going lean with it, you're going to still need to add some kind of fat to it with olive oil, canola oil, peanut oil, or something just to keep it to where it tastes not so tough and dry. But when you're out in a restaurant, they're going to be going for these higher fat ground beefs. And the reason why is because fat carries flavor. And most of these restaurants are not in the business of trying to keep people healthy. They're in the business of getting them to come back. And if you've got a cut of meat, or you've got a ground up meat, that when I make this, it's going to have a ton more fat, but it's carrying more flavor, you're going to be much more quickly to go back to that place because you love what you just ate. Luckily, our phones, we can find out what the fat content is to almost any food we eat that's not in a mom and pop's restaurant, and we can even calculate it within a margin of error with it. And there's so many apps that you can do through the App Store that any of them are good. They all work, whether you pay the $25 one or get the free app. They all have the same stuff in it, more or less. And you don't have to go to that extreme if you don't want to. Remember when you're cooking something and it's got meat, if it's got fat on it that you haven't trimmed off, a portion of that's going to get into you even if you're grilling it and the fat comes out. Some of that's going to remain. Some of the meat's going to have fat at a higher level and cholesterol at a higher level, even from the same animal. If you look at a chicken and you've got the the white meat and the dark meat. The dark meat is, to me, more flavorful and I like it more. But it is going to have a little bit more fat in it just because the fat's throughout the entire meat. The same thing if anybody's ever cooked a duck. That thing's got so much fat in it, you've got to elevate it in a pan so it can drip and collect. Doesn't mean you shouldn't eat duck. Just be mindful of it, especially if you've got a condition with your blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, or the doctor's worried that you could be heading in that direction. Fish is almost open season with it. If you want to have a fish, I say go with it. People ask, what about mercury? I tell pregnant moms to eat fish. And when moms are breastfeeding after they give birth, I put make sure that they have fish on their WIC vouchers. And if you go on Google and just try to find people that have gotten poisoned from the mercury, you are far more likely to get mercury poisoning from those light bulbs that we have. If one of those breaks, your exposure to mercury is going to be far more than anything you're going to get eating a fish. You're going to most likely, if you've had a filling in your mouth that's older than 10 years old, you're taking in mercury every moment of every day because it slowly leaches out over time. So be a little more careful of maybe of where you get the meat of the fish. If it's out of the South China Sea that has large amounts of pollution that goes into it, you might get a little bit more mercury in it. If it's going to be farm-raised salmon, the amount of mercury in that's going to be so small that that you can almost not detect it in a chemistry lab. So if you want fish, eat it. The fatty fishes are actually better for our heart than the non-fatty fishes. So you have something like mackerel or tuna or salmon that actually has quite a bit of fat, and as it cooks you even see the little beating up on it. If it's in the broiler or something where you see the fats coming to the surface. Those fats are fantastic for us when it comes to our cardiovascular system. But even the ones that are more like tilapia or trout or mahi-mahi, those, though they do not have as much fat in them, they're still incredibly healthy for us. If you're not a fish fan, don't eat fish, because you don't have to. Pork is not off the table. Once again, just when you look at a pork chop, a lot of times what you notice is the meat part of it is perfectly just, it looks lean as anything, it's the outer edge. You can even cook it with that for some of the flavor and then cut it away if you've got problems with your ticker or any part of your cardiovascular system. Now, if you are also happen to be gestationally diabetic, you're at a higher risk of becoming diabetic. If you're diabetic, you have a much higher risk of heart disease, high cholesterol, or any other cardiovascular condition. So if you're 40 and up, and you've got diabetes, start to be a little more mindful of what you're eating as far as too much of the saturated fats from animal sources. Because those also can start to kick in. And once the diabetes kicks in after 40, the body chemistry changes a lot. Now, if there's anyone in here that's diabetic or has a family member who's diabetic, you can eat sweets. Now again, if you've got a mom that is diabetic or a dad that's diabetic and they want cake, they can eat cake. They just need to learn how to count their carbohydrates, and you can watch a 5-minute YouTube video on it. It's the easiest thing in the world to learn how to do. You can learn it in 5 minutes, make a little cheat card, put it in your wallet for the 2 or 3 times you're trying to remember it afterwards, and that's it. Now, if somebody's not monitoring their diabetes and they're eating sweets all the time, then there's a problem because that sugar's going to enter the bloodstream and it's going to have nothing to do with it. So when we take in donuts, even someone that's not diabetic, if we take in too many carbohydrates, whether it's rice, or pasta, or table sugar, and we don't burn it off, the body turns it into fat. That's why you can go on a low-fat diet and actually gain fat. Because we're taking in too many carbohydrates and we're not burning off enough energy. So it's the term that I'm using for counting your carbohydrates is carbohydrate counting. And that it is the easiest thing to learn if you're diabetic, and it takes away a lot of the guesswork. Because you just look at a plate. And you say, okay, this much of this plate is my vegetables, I know it's this. This is mashed potatoes, it's covering that much of my plate, which is so many servings, so that's so many carbohydrates I can have. I'm going to eat less of that because I want the dessert. Or I might not eat any of the mashed potatoes, and I'll eat the veggies and the meat because I want dessert. Fun, you've counted for it. So anybody that's diabetic or has family members that are diabetic, instead of just, trying to talk them out of eating the sweets, talk them into learning how to do the carbohydrate counting, and then they can have the sweets, but yet they're getting the health benefits that you're hoping that they get by not eating the sweets to begin with. Dairy. Dairy and dairy-like products, and I say that because we've now got options galore that aren't actual dairy, has never been easier to do. Now for women, when they hit the age of 34, their bodies stop absorbing calcium and vitamin D at the same level that they did before that. When they start menopause, that drops by half. And women tend to drink less milk than men. And it's probably because of a flavor that they dislike in the milk a lot of times. A lot of times it's a flavoring thing. Sometimes it's a texture thing. But we now have the almond milks, the coconut milk, we have the cashew milk. I'm a much bigger fan of the cashew and the almond, but they fortify even the coconut milk now to where it's got the calcium. It usually has 50% more calcium than regular milk. So if somebody's trying to get the calcium in, but they ain't going to be drinking a whole 8-ounce cup of milk. It's just not going to happen. Well, you can get the almond milk, and it's 4 ounces with the same amount. If you get the almond milk that's unsweetened, it has the flavor sweetness that's equal to regular milk. Except for it's, instead of skim milk having 90 calories and whole milk having 150 calories, the almond milk has 30 calories for an 8-ounce cup. And most of the calories are fat. And for me, that's a wonderful thing. Because the fats are good fats. They're the fats that are, even someone that's got, cardiovascular issues, you're not going to hear too many doctors say avoid nuts. Because those are the good fats, again, that we need into our body. And when you make the almond milk, all you're taking is a couple of good handfuls of nuts. You put them into water, and you let them hydrate for a few days. Then you puree that up, and then they add calcium and vitamin D to it. So you're actually able to increase the fat, which makes you stay full longer, keeps you from needing to have that snack as quickly as before. When you add it to a cereal, you're not adding, because the main calories that's coming from milk is from sugar. I mean, lactose is a sugar. So when you pour that in, you're adding sugar to corn flakes or the flakes of any kind of cereal, which are a carbohydrate, which is a sugar. Then to make people want to eat it, they've added a sugar. And then people wonder, God, why am I so hungry at 9 o'clock? I just had a bowl of cereal at 7:30. It's because the body's already processed it all. But if you go ahead and say you have an egg at the breakfast with a small bowl of cereal with the almond milk or the cashew milk in it, all of a sudden it's 10:30, you're like, no, I haven't wanted to eat anything yet. And it's because it takes so much longer for proteins and fats to digest in our stomach. Now, convenience and making things work at work. Frozen dinners are going to have to be in the equation. I can't imagine that any other way to avoid it. Because there's just days where y'all don't have time to do anything else but throw something in the microwave, pull it out, and eating a bag of broccoli steamed ain't going to cut it on one of those days. Look for the ones that are healthier. And that's easier to see. Like if you go over, and the first few times you grocery shop looking for the healthier ones. Don't think that all of a sudden you're having to eat the Weight Watchers meals. Because technically they're not any healthier. They've got just as much sodium in it. but they're built to where if you're working the point system of Weight Watchers, you get so many points. There's some of them in there that are healthy, there's some of them that aren't. If it's mashed potatoes and meatloaf, it's not going to be any healthier mashed potatoes and meatloaf than Stouffer's. The Stouffer's will taste a lot better. But Amy's is a good one because if you look on there, it's got far less sodium. It's got far less, if any, preservatives in it, and it's actually got fresher ingredients in it. Start looking for things that if you, on the box, there's not a vegetable at all in this. Try to find something, one, you like, and two, has things in it that are actually good for you. If it's one of those that half of it's potatoes or half of it's pasta, remember, that's going to go through your body very quickly. And in an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, you're going to start to get hungry again. But if it's something that's mostly meat, and it's got or at least a third meat, and a bunch of vegetables in there too with the starch, you're going to stay full a lot longer. And it'll keep you from having to go to the snack machine and get something. Because we're only going to be hungry for so long before we do something about it. I mean, and that's just human nature. We're not going to just starve ourselves too many days before we say, forget this sucks. Leftovers from the night before can be your absolute best friend, because a lot of times, especially if you have children, the leftovers a lot has healthy stuff in it, because even if we're not going to eat the healthy stuff on our own, a lot of times we're going to do what we can to get it into our kids. And that allows you to have stuff to take home. Now, I get a lot of picky eaters. And Mom saying, what in the hell do I do for some picky eaters? And I always say cheat. And it works for spouses. Just don't get caught. And so what you want to do is start looking for recipes on Google. And go on YouTube. Because these are the best cooking classes you'll ever see is on YouTube. You can actually see somebody walk through the process of cooking something. And there's just tons of recipes and videos where veggies and other foods are added in and no one can see them, they can't taste them, and they can't pick them out. And if you get caught now doing it with an older kid or a spouse, they're going to just be like, well, I knew I tasted something funny. They didn't taste nothing. They tore it down too quick to taste anything. But you've got someone in there just a carbaholic, and they just, I'm meat and potatoes, that's all I'm ever going to do is meat and potatoes. And you're like, fun. 2/3 of the time I'm going to give you mashed potatoes. Most guys will be like, great, I'll do the mashed potatoes. But if you take a cauliflower and cook it exactly the same way you would a potato, and puree it just like a potato. Now you've got two things that look the same. You have some potato and you have some cauliflower. Now you mix them together because the flavor of potato is stronger than the flavor of cauliflower. You add a little bit of gravy to that, and you're going to fool 90% of people and 100% of kids. Why I'm saying that is, if you're having to do that to get something into your spouse, or for sure into your kids, you're going to be sneaking it in on yourself the very next day when you do the leftovers. So when cooking the night before, having the forethought of, okay, I'm going to make 30% more than I normally do. That way I've got enough to add for any lunches the next day. And that helps out being able to practically eat well when you're at work. Because it's cooked. And you can put it in there and heat it up and you're good. Now if y'all have a kitchen that y'all can actually get to on a regular basis without having to be torn away from it, look for recipes online that first are 20 minutes or less to cook. Then you want to read the recipe. Because you can read the recipe real quick and figure out, oh, Yeah, it takes 20 minutes to cook it after you spend an hour prepping. You know, so if there's an ingredient that's this long and Emerald Lagasse wrote the recipe, it's guaranteed to not be a 20-minute recipe. Look for the really good recipes, 20 minutes or less, and look for as few ingredients as possible. Because one, it takes less time to prep it, takes less time to cook it, and if you had to throw it out, you're not throwing out that much food. If you just had to turn it off on the stovetop and run out and didn't get back for 3 hours, what have you lost? And it's not that much. However, on the times you can go through with it, there are tons of good recipes that are 6, 7 ingredients or fewer that take 20, 25 minutes to make. If you utilize frozen food to where your veggies are coming out of it, that's 4 minutes. That's off to the side. If you're doing the pasta in the bowl, now in the pot, make sure if you're wanting to do whole wheat pasta, it does stay in your belly longer, it does keep you full longer, it does take a little longer to cook. And if that whole wheat pasta says cook for 12 minutes, I would knock that thing out for about 13 to 14 minutes. It'll help pull a little bit more of that starch out, and it'll give it that softer texture we're used to. This whole wheat pasta definitely does have a coarser feel to it. Once again, if it's your kids, they're not going to notice. As adults, we're going to notice a whole lot more because we love to bring up how picky our kids are. But just as often, we're every bit as selective and finicky as the kids are. And we're trying something new in the house, or whether you're at work. Frame of mind matters a lot. So if before you ever put this in your mouth, you're like, you're not going to like it. I mean, that stuff could be the most delicious thing anybody's ever made, but if you're just already turning your nose up at it, you're not going to like it that much. If you're at home and you're doing this stuff, even if you don't like it, try not to make the face in front of a kid. Because you'd be amazed how many times kids don't like to eat foods because of the look they've seen on their parents' face when they've eaten it. I've seen it. I've done experiments myself of give 15 kids the food. They're tearing it up. They get to eat, start eating 5 minutes before mom or dad walks in. They sit next to them, they take one bite, and they make a face that kid doesn't like, and that's the last bite that kid's eating. Went from tearing it up to not eating it at all. Because once they see mom and dad make that face, it is over. If you know you're really picky, and there's certain foods you will eat, don't think about the foods you won't eat. But look for recipes that are healthy for what you will eat. Don't focus heavily on trying to work stuff into your diet. Not yet. Take your baby steps. First, eat the stuff you know you will eat. But try to eat those a little bit healthier. If you know you like making this, but it's got butter in it, be careful what your butter substitute is. If it's that block that says margarine, that's got that film that you open up and it in no way looks, smells, or tastes like butter, I wouldn't use it. Plain margarine is actually got more in common with plastic than it does with actual butter. Margarine was actually developed in 1918 as a food supplement to give to horses. And when the horses started dying from eating too much of this because their bodies couldn't handle it, they decided, if we add extra flavoring to it, we add some food coloring to it, people might eat this as a butter substitute. And that's only for the ones that say margarine, because margarine is an actual trademark for a certain chemical compound. But if it's smart balance, that's a totally different thing. There's some of the spreads that are made out of yogurt. Those are healthy. So if you're wanting to switch away, just remember that you're still gonna wanna use as much discretion on how much butter you're use or butter substitute. And butter in itself is not bad. You just wanna, again, use it in discretion, and if you've got a cardiovascular problem, butter may be off the menu. The doc will tell you what's on your menu and what's not on your menu when it comes to cardiovascular problems. When you buy butter, don't buy the salted butter. And it's not because there's salt in it. No restaurant buys salted butter at all. The reason was, when butter gets made and gets processed, there's a process of people actually grade the butter in the facilities. And if there is a off smell to it or a foul flavor, they add salt to it to cover that up. So the butter that's unsalted is a higher quality and tastes better. They just add salt to cover up the fact that it doesn't taste as good because this batch of butter wasn't very good. That is the only reason why there's salt added to any butter. So if you go and you get regular butter that's unsalted, you can actually use more of it and it tastes better. Now, does anybody have any questions about anything when it comes to trying to actually make a healthy options work, given y'all's unusual line of work, or even for stuff at home with your kids, spouses, or anything like that? Alrighty, that's the end of what I've got. Thanks for having me out here.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.